So I'm a little bit nervous about how tongue-in-cheek that's going to be, but anyway, welcome, here's Kieran. Thank you.
All right, well, firstly I'd like to thank Dex and all the organisers involved today. Certainly gives us many opportunity to present in front of you all. I'd also like to thank you all for coming on your Saturday and listening to what I've got to say and what I want to go through today. So when I actually started writing this talk like this week, I was under the impression that I only really needed to talk for about 30 minutes. Unfortunately, I looked at the program and I think that it was actually penciled in for an entire hour. Now, I'm probably assuming that I'm more confused than the organisers today, so I have added a bit more content to it, and there's basically 3 different areas that I do want to go through. The first one is why developers hate sysadmins, and it's going to talk about the relationship between developers and sysadmins. The second area that I do want to go through is talking about the cloud and cloud hosting in a little bit more detail. And the third area that I do want to look at is basically suggesting some tools that web developers can use that will actually help them improve their website and the way that it actually performs on the internet. I will admit there's a bit of a carpet bombing technique to presenting. I'm just going to try a few different topics and see which ones land the mark and which ones actually have some relevance. So I do encourage any feedback, and I will have some time for some questions towards the end of it. Before I launch into the talk into too much detail, I will introduce myself. I represent Anchor, and the company that I work for. So Anchor's a web hosting company. We've been doing it for about 12 years, based primarily here in Sydney. We've got about 35 people working for us, and we're very much a boutique kind of hosting company. The approach that we tend to take is we want to give you direct access to smart people who actually allow you to build a website and make it run well. Myself, I'm currently the CEO of Anchor. I've been involved personally for about 7 or 8 years, and during that period of time, I've worn pretty much every hat under the sun, from sales and marketing through to technical support, sales, accounts, pretty much every hat you can in a business. My background is primarily technical. I am a techie by trade and a sysadmin by trade. What I would first want to do, and the first thing that I want to go through, normally this talk we kick off with basically defining what a system administrator is. I'm going to go the other way this time, and I'm going to start going through what a sysadmin is not. We'll perhaps burst some of the stereotypes that are out there. And there are a few stereotypes around sysadmins, and I get that. A lot of them have been self-created over the years, and do have a bit of history, and there is kind of a tradition that the sysadmin doesn't do a huge amount of work. I can guarantee you that this is not your typical sysadmin. We do a little bit more work than that. I'd like to think our profession does have a bit more basis than that. We do work weird hours because we are in the environment where we've got to allow stuff to run 24/7. And it isn't uncommon in our organisation to see people drag themselves in at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The other thing that I have heard in the industry is you system guys don't really know what you're talking about. You just know how to use Google really well. That's all you really do. I kind of want to burst that misconception as well. This is a publication that actually came out back in 96, 97 or thereabouts, and did have a big stereotype, and it was a bastard operator from hell. He basically, I don't know if people may have read it, it did come out quite a while ago, and he basically ran systems and took advantage, I guess, of his users, and it was a very comical fictional piece that was written. There's probably about 12 publications of it that came out back in the day. I'd like to burst that misconception as well. We're not entirely all bastards. Not all of us anyway. We're not vampires either. Whilst we do work some pretty crazy hours and work through the night, that's more out of necessity to try and keep the systems running 24/7. But I don't think we are vampires. This is an interesting one. I was speaking to someone recently in the industry who was kind of of the opinion that system administrators are really just a sliding bar determining how much resources that get allocated to a machine. Once again, I'd like to think there's a little bit more to our professionalism than just being a sliding bar determining how much RAM we give someone, how much CPU time, and how much we're going to charge for each month. I'd like to think there's a little bit more to us than that as well. And the final one, we're not Satan. I know that there are some people that may be a little bit possessed in this industry, but we're not entirely nasty. we are perhaps just a little bit misunderstood. So what is a sysadmin? Now I'm not going to get you to read all that because there is a lot of detail there, but there is certainly 3 areas that I do want to highlight. So a sysadmin in a general sense is basically responsible for installing, supporting and monitoring servers or other computer systems. So what does this actually really mean? In a more practical sense, they find the hardware that your websites are going to run on. That includes the servers, the networking equipment, they manage the data center environment, the physical building, the air conditioning, the power, they rack up the hardware and install it, and they get the operating systems, they install the operating systems and install all the software that makes your website run. So this includes such things for Joomla, you'll be talking about installing PHP, installing MySQL, installing Apache, and basically getting it to the point that it will actually run. In addition to that, they're responsible for tuning this environment and making it run well. So it's one thing to get it up and running, but it's all more important to actually make it run well and make it run consistently well over a longer period of time. So this basically comes down to the real world tasks that they need to do is such things as periodic maintenance, applying software updates, doing backups, and making sure that everything is working and secure. And the other thing is, it's not just now, it's not just when they initially install the machine and get it working, they're actually looking for the long term. We know that when we deploy our machine, we'll typically want to make sure that that machine is going to run for anywhere up to 7 years. So it's looking a long way into the future. It's not something you just build and set and forget. It's something that you are really looking towards the long term of what is going to make this run for the entire life of the server. If you think about today, if you go back 7 years and think what web hosting was all about then, you're pretty much talking stuff like PHP 3. I think we're up to now PHP 5.4. MySQL version 3.23, we're now using MySQL 5. That's a very long time for software to be around, and we need to make sure that it's going to work for that period of time and work effectively. Besides all that, I think there's really 2 core aspects that actually makes a good sysadmin. So that was very much what I gave you there, the textbook answer of what a sysadmin is. I think there's really 2 values that actually come that makes a really good sysadmin. The first one is system availability. It's pretty fundamental, pretty straightforward. You want to make sure the website is actually up and running. If the website's not up and running, there's one simple thing that a sysadmin needs to do, and that's get it back up and running again. The second thing that a sysadmin really needs to do comes down to improving efficiency. Now, I'm not actually talking about the efficiency of servers. Well, I kind of class it under system availability. But what I do say or what I do mean by improving efficiency is really coming down to the developer's efficiency. At the end of the day, if you put a request into your web hosting company to make a change, and it takes 2 weeks to be completed, then they've kind of missed the point. They're not really helping you, they're not facilitating what you're trying to achieve. They may be maintaining system availability by having a 2-week lead time to actually approve the stuff, but they're really not approving your efficiency and they're really missing the point. The final point, and it's kind of a mantra that comes from the sysadmin world, and that's a good sysadmin should be able to automate themselves out of a job. Sounds a little bit like there's a bit of a disconnect in that, but to this day I've never known a sysadmin that's been that good, that's actually been able to build systems that well, that they've put themselves out of a job. But that is really kind of the mantra that sysadmins and good sysadmins will work towards. It's kind of like, why build machines when you can actually build robots to build those machines? And that's very much the mentality a good sysadmin should have. Once you automate something, it becomes very repeatable, and everything ends up in a very known state and it's very stable. So obviously we've got on the other side of the fence, we've got developers. Now obviously I'm probably in a room of people that do an amount of web development, so I'm not going to even try and define what a web developer is. But I am going to actually have a look at what web developers are faced with. And to be honest, I think they have quite a tough job. You've got to turn around some sometimes very cryptic hand-wavy gestures from clients and turn them actually into deliverable services. And I think that's quite a difficult challenge. It's something that I wouldn't get a huge amount of interest in doing. There are a lot of challenges that I imagine that developers face, certain things such as budget overruns, unrealistic deadlines that are set by clients, client scope creep, and they don't even realise that they're changing the scope of the project, and system administrators getting in your way. They're trying to create these roadblocks. They're not going to give you root access to the machines. They want to know every reason why you need a piece of software installed. So they really are, is this disconnect. You've got sysadmins who care about getting their application running. They've got all these external pressures to actually get services delivered. And then you've got sysadmins who also want to get the application running, are actually caring about doing it the right way so that they can continue to run the service, not just today, but for the next 7 years. And there is this very much disconnect where you need to do an amount of analysis to make sure that you're deploying stuff in a practical, reliable fashion so it will continue to work for that period of time. I am going to get to and go through how these groups can work harmoniously together. But before I do that, no talk would be complete without actually running through a handful of examples of situations that we've come across in our time managing machines where developers have set up machines in ways that possibly won't be entirely maintainable. So the first one, XAMPP, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. I don't know if anyone's heard of that before. It's a design as a development environment. So what it is, it's basically an all-in-one stack of Apache, MySQL, PHP, and Perl. You can basically install it onto a machine, download a single file. If you're running a Windows machine, you can download a single .exe file, run that, and it'll actually set up your machine to provide a web serving environment. It's designed to make it really, really easy. You can set it up within 5 minutes. It's certainly a lot quicker than downloading all the, like downloading a copy of Linux, installing that, installing PHP, installing MySQL, trying to configure it and set it up. The one drawback is it is designed for a development environment and really only a development environment only. As a result, it has no notion of security, none whatsoever. In fact, if you actually look at the manual, this is actually the second or third paragraph in. The default security configuration is not good from a security point of view, as it is not secure enough for a production environment. Please don't use XAMPP in such an environment. I'd go one step a little bit further and say, if you put this in production, you're just waiting to be hacked. It's only a matter of time. You'd be surprised how often we actually find this running in a production environment. And I can kind of understand why it's happening. You get stuff online, you get stuff to a point that you can use it very, very quickly, but it's not maintainable and it's not going to work on an ongoing basis. The second example that I've got, I kind of affectionately refer to as like using a sledgehammer to kill an ant. So we once had a tomcat web developer who had uploaded his content via FTP to the website to his server and was expecting it just to run. Unfortunately, it wasn't doing exactly what was intended at the time. Now, Tomcat is, I know, full of a room full of Joomla developers, so you've probably never heard of Tomcat before. But what Tomcat is an application server which basically allows Java websites to run. So under Joomla, you've got Apache, you've got PHP, and that essentially allows it to run. When you're using Java, you use Tomcat and provides the exact same function. The primary difference between Apache and Tomcat is Tomcat's very self-contained, and it does actually rely on specific configuration to be set up to work properly. Insofar as like Tomcat needs to be able to see your application files. If you just upload it to the server and expect it to work, it's just never going to happen. The web developer that we dealt with decided to run that on the server. Ooh. Now, I don't know if anyone's familiar with this command, but I'll quickly run through it. Char own basically changes the ownership of files. Linux has the notion that every file is owned by an individual user and it's owned by a particular account. It's owned by a particular group as well. So that particular command there changes all the files on the server from the Tomcat to the Tomcat user account into the Tomcat user group. The / means it starts at the root of the server, and -R means it does recursively over the entire file system. To turn it around and look at Windows, it's like changing the permissions on every single file from your C drive and going down the thread. The net result of running that is the Tomcat application worked. They went into production. After running that command, their content went live, it worked fine. The problem was I had to reboot the machine at some point in time. And I can tell you the machine didn't reboot after that. That was a ticking time bomb that was only really waited until someone decided to reboot the machine, and it just simply didn't come back from there. The third example that I've got is Ruby sharding. So Ruby is another language. It's very Web 2.0. It's very development in a lot of regards. It allows for very rapid development and to get stuff out the door very, very quickly. Certainly nowhere near as mature as PHP and other languages that are out there. but it is very shiny. We have one developer that actually came to us and was asking us to make very specific changes and install very specific versions of the software. Because it's not particularly mature, it's not going to last. Or there's going to be a lot of changes. It's really not defined by, or it's not really designed to go into production in certain instances. There's a lot of alpha and beta code out there, and we're just not prepared to do it in production. The response from the email when we said it's quite blank that we just won't do it was something along the lines of that. Now, I know it is quite tongue-in-cheek, but I know they won't be with us for too much longer after that, because they did want to run specific versions of code, and we wouldn't allow them to do it in production. So this is probably, what I'm trying to highlight here is just a very big disconnect between where the two camps come from. A lot of the times sysadmins don't want to get in the way, but they generally need to do something along these lines because they want to maintain, or they want to ensure the maintainability of a machine. At the end of the day, we're the ones that are going to be getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning if something fails, so we're not inclined to run install software. So how sysadmins and developers can work harmoniously. I did say that I'll get to this. So these are a few pointers that I've learned over the years, and it seems to work quite well for us. There's a few things that I would like to highlight. So the first thing is we'd like to be engaged really early in the process. And when I say really early, like when you're actually thinking about creating a website, speak to us then. Don't call us up 2 days before you want to go live and go, I need a website or I need hosting for my website. Engage us well in advance. The second thing that I think is really important is actually tell them about, or tell us about your end goals. There's actually nothing more worse and nothing more frustrating than to be fed information in a piecemeal fashion. Actually tell us you want to run a Joomla site. Tell us that you're expecting this site to get 10,000 unique visitors a month. If we know this up front, then we can actually build the infrastructure in a way that will actually support it. The second thing is, by default, system administrators are typically problem solvers. At the end of the day, they're all about getting a complex problem, putting it apart, and coming up with a solution that works. We also do know in great detail how operating systems work and how systems should work in a holistic fashion. Really leverage that experience, because that's what we bring to the table. The final thing is, and it sounds so simple, and I say this ad nauseum, never deploy to production without testing. It sounds so simple, but the big thing is your development environment must actually mimic your production environment. So often we actually see people who are developing on macOS machines, doing everything locally, and then deploying it to a Linux machine with different versions of software, and then for some reason wondering why it's different and breaking it. As soon as you do that, if your development environment doesn't actually match your production environment, then you kind of lose the entire argument that it's a problem with the production environment. You're not actually mimicking what you're deploying to, and it's going to lead to a lot of friction and a lot of frustration from both sides of the fence. So I mentioned I was going to talk about the cloud. I guess the question is, how does this change all in the cloud? Now there are about 1,000 different definitions out on the internet about what cloud computing is and what cloud hosting is. I'm not going to try and define it because I don't think that we'll actually agree on anything. Every single person I speak to in the industry seems to have a different definition of cloud, so I'm not going to touch that. That said, I actually put this list together about a month ago, and it was based on, I was looking at some of the marketing collateral, to use a polite word, that went with cloud, and basically this is what every single thing that I could find in about a 5-minute search that the cloud can actually do for you, allegedly.
Does it play Kate Bush while it's doing car hosting?
It's possible. It's possible. So these are just some of the things. Elastic computing, I won't run through all of them. It reduces business risk. It improves customer service somehow. Infinite scalability, I like that one. And it will do your laundry and possibly make you breakfast. You've heard it here first. The cloud can do that for you. So that may be a little bit of a cynical take. I'm not really going to comment any more than that. I think cloud computing is good, and it does have its advantages, but it also does come with some limitations as well. And I don't think it's ever going to be the be-all and end-all of hosting. When we've heard cloud, it's put banner words, it's called cloud hosting. It's come up on the radar, on our radar, in the industry, probably for the 18 months, 2 years, past 18 months, 2 years. We kind of look at it and go, we think we've been doing cloud hosting, or the same thing as cloud hosting for the past 10 or 12 years, we just didn't call it that. One of the things that the cloud kind of spruiks, cloud hosting really tries to spruik, is the different cost model. Now, I don't want to pull it apart too much, but I do want to talk about what is actually involved in providing hosting, irrespective if you're doing cloud hosting, or if you're doing just hosting in general, in a more traditional sense. So some of the things that go into a hosted environment, firstly, you need a data center. Now, we operate out of Global Switch. It's one of the biggest data centers, the biggest data center in Australia. Cost $250 million to build. It's just over in, just in Pyrmont, just on Harris Street, so it's just around the corner. We operate out of there. We've got about 700 machines in that facility. So in addition to the data center, then you start having a look at what gets added in there to actually run this infrastructure, run the services that you use. So they're air chiller units, or they call them crack units, which are computer room air chiller units. They're done redundant, so you've got to have them in place. You've got to have cooling. You've got to have power. Naturally, if you're going to be running servers, you need to have power installed. You need to have internet. You need to do this redundant. You need to have two of each. They need to be delivered by geographically diverse paths. So if someone does dig up a cable in the street and your service is going to remain offline, they've got to be delivered by different ISPs. So you can't just connect to one ISP. You need to use multiple internet carriers to provide that. Static transfer switches and UPS systems. So if the main power feeds do go down, then you do have that backup. Then you need to add some generators in, so if you have a longer outage. And all this stuff needs to be done redundantly. You need to add in some fire suppression. That also goes into the building. You need engineers to run all this infrastructure, because it's all pretty complex and it's got to work 24/7. Certain things that our data center provider Global Switch does is they do fail over to the generators once a month. And make sure the gensets do come up as expected and load transfers and transfers back as intended. So if there is a power failure, it'll automatically switch over. You need security. So when I go to Global Switch, I've got an access card which has my photo on it. I swipe my card. My picture comes up on the thing behind it. There's a security desk that I've got a pass to get into it. That's going to be me 24/7. And of course, you need the sysadmins in there as well. Now, what I'm trying to get across, cloud or not, whether you're doing cloud hosting or what we do, which we don't call cloud hosting, at the end of the day, your cost models don't change. The economics don't change. If you're going to be providing hosting services, then you need to have all these things, irrespective of if you're going to call yourself cloud or not. What cloud providers have attempted to do in recent times, though, is replace the sysadmin contact time, the individual contact time, with pre-web interfaces. Amazon's probably the biggest with their AWS product, so you can just spin up and spin down instances as required. And the question that seems to be coming up, does this actually eliminate the need for sysadmins and people to run this infrastructure? Well, I'm not entirely convinced that it does. You still need the system architects to actually run a lot of this infrastructure. It's still going to run on servers, it's still going to run on hardware, there's still going to be network connections there that need to run. You need to also make sure that faults continue to be dealt with properly. So if something dies at 2 o'clock in the morning, then someone needs to respond to it. If you look at AWS, they've changed their model so much as they've defined availability zones. So if you actually want full availability now, you need to actually deploy your application in 2 different locations and then worry about the complexities of maintaining that. I guess my opinion is the sysadmin skill level is actually changing, but what is actually happening is you're adding a layer of abstraction between where the end clients actually are and where the infrastructure is. So if you want to make requests and get changes made, you kind of reliant on now a web interface. And I can tell you what happens, or I asked the question, what happens when that slider bar that gives you more resources hits the end of its limits? You're still in the same boat that you always have been. The problem is you don't actually have the sysadmins directly available to contact. So whether we actually look at cloud or not, I'm not entirely convinced that no sysadmins is ever really going to be an alternative. Just moving on, just some useful tools, just some tools that I find that I recommend to my clients time and time again, especially web developers. The first one is Blitz.io. So what this does is load testing and performance testing. So what this is kind of answering, and what it attempts to do is answer the question is, how many visitors can my site take? And how quickly can I service those clients on the infrastructure that I've got deployed at the moment? So I'll tell you just a really brief story about some load testing that I've seen done in the past, which hasn't been done particularly well. And I think this largely fixes that problem. About 5 or 6 years ago, we deployed, I think it was a 7-machine cluster. So it had 5 web servers at your front end, so it could be horizontally scaled out as necessary, and then 2 databases, servers at the back using a master-slave configuration. And it was designed to be highly available and to be able to service significant volumes of traffic. At the time, and it was quite some time ago, it would have been 5 or 6 years, the client that we had wanted to do load testing against it. So they actually decided that they'd do the load testing from their office. They fired up the machine and then just started throwing requests at their web infrastructure. Having the forethought, or I guess the vision of seeing this happen in the past, we knew it wasn't going to work out too well. When you're actually trying to do load testing against a cluster of 7 machines, and you're only using one machine and you're doing it over an ADSL 1 connection, you're just never going to saturate the amount of capacity that you've got at the other end. I've seen that example happen time and time again, where people have tried to actually run infrastructure through its paces, but they just haven't had the capacity to do so. Blitz.io largely fixes this. It's a software as a service company. It's based in the US, but I think they do have one presence here. If they don't, they will shortly. What you do is you basically go to that website, you sign up, you put in a credit card, and you say, here's my website. You need to verify that it is your website. And then it will just try to throw as much traffic at it as possible. And it will basically tell you at the point that how many concurrent users your website can actually handle before it starts falling over.
Can it do transactions as well as just visitors?
So it works in a couple of fashions. There are a lot of options. So, like one model, and I've only looked at it really, really briefly, but I know a few people who've used it. You can actually do a rush where you actually set how many visitors you want and how long you want that traffic to be sustained for. And then there's another model where you say, over the next 2 hours, I want to have 250,000 visitors, up to 250,000 visitors over that period of time, and they just gradually ramp it up over that period of time. And basically the way it does is it'll gradually ramp it up to the point that it starts seeing performance degradation, and then it will actually provide a report. That's kind of the upper limit of the infrastructure that you're running. And that stuff's kind of invaluable when you're doing capacity planning and working out how to build the infrastructure and grow it out from there. There's a couple of other tools that we've come across that seem to work pretty well. So New Relic is one that we've seen a fair bit of use for. This does web application and performance monitoring, so it actually does a lot of trending on how well your website is actually performing. And we'll give you reports on, I guess, where the bottlenecks are in your infrastructure, so it'll give you some ideas on where the changes can be made. We found that one to be quite good. Pingdom, which is more about availability and uptime monitoring. So that basically monitors the website once every 2 minutes. If the website goes down, sends you an email to let you know that it's gone down. It's really handy if, for example, you see consistent trends. Like obviously backups need to happen at some time of day. Certain web infrastructure will hit bottlenecks when you try to actually copy all the data off the machine. And if you start getting reports and you start seeing that your website continually goes down between 2 and 3 a.m. every night, then you know that there's a problem there and you can start hitting your web host up and saying what's going on during this period. It's really a tool to keep web hosting companies honest, because you're not necessarily going to be up at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning to check it, but this tool will do it for you. The final one's Git, which is distributed revision control, software management systems. I know probably a lot of people have heard of that one before. But that's basically just allows a lot of developers to work on the same content and maintain different revisions of that content. It also allows you to deploy code in a more methodical and systematic fashion. So if you have a production environment, a live environment, then you can actually deploy the same code base and do it in an automated fashion, which is always a bit of a win. So that's pretty much all that I've got for you today. Well, thank you for your time. I think we've got a bit of time for questions.
Sure. We do?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, please.
Sure.
First of all, we love you, Sysadmins. You're beautiful people.
Oh, thanks for the kind words.
There's a bit of talk at the moment around Google's new open source project called PageSpeed.
Yep.
Have you heard about that?
I've heard about it.
And if so, what's your thoughts?
To be honest, I don't know a huge amount about it at this stage. Send me an email. I can certainly get one of my guys to answer that.
Sure.
I know that it's a module that can be installed on a lot of web servers, and that's about the extent of my knowledge.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. No,
Yes.
Do that on the Python Rails thing you said earlier.
Alright, so yeah, Ruby's a lot, the code is a lot less mature. So there's a lot of gems that are coming out at the speed of light. So they're basically add-ons for Ruby for all intents and purposes. And because of the rate they're coming out, so the problem that we've got as sysadmins, when we deploy code, we rely on software vendors to keep that code up to date and reliable. So as the vendors that we tend to use are people like Red Hat. And Red Hat basically say for the next 7 years we're going to provide you with system updates and security updates for the operating system. With new technologies that haven't been around long enough to be included as part of the vendor, so then we've actually got to take the onus of keeping that software up to date and making sure that it runs and doing all. Every time there's a security update, if it's not included as part of Red Hat, then we've got to backport all those changes back into the code base and make sure that it's maintained up to date. So as a result, we won't. There's a big difference between bleeding edge and cutting edge. We won't touch the bleeding edge stuff which Ruby is in some contexts, not all. There is a lot of stable stuff. We've done a huge amount of Ruby stuff. GitHub and TestFlight applications with service use it extensively. So it's more the content that they wanted to use and the gems that they wanted to use. We weren't prepared to support in production. That's why that is. Does that answer your question?
Are there any common tweaks that you do to a server to get Joomla to run well, or
yeah, there are quite a lot. Some of it's part of our IP, so I'm not going to give a huge amount away. But so, like common stuff is certain things like using Nginx instead of Apache is a really simple one. With MySQL, you can use Kona, which is something else that's going to give you better performance than the standard MySQL storage engine. So the way that we approach all our system administration stuff, we use Puppet, which gives basically centralized configuration management. So we've got 700 machines. Actually logging into each one of those and doing maintenance is going to be an absolute nightmare. So we have a Puppet master that sits in the corner of the data center and holds all the configuration for all our machines. And then so when we deploy a machine, we give them classes. So if we're deploying a Joomla machine, we say that this machine is just to be a Joomla machine. Apply the configuration that we know that's going to work for Joomla. And then over time, we learn things, ways you can tune MySQL, ways you can tune Apache, the ways that you can, for example, with PHP, you can pull out a huge amount of the binaries, a huge amount of the modules, and use a very small statically compiled instance of PHP, which is going to give better performance in that use case. And then you tell Puppet to only deploy that to the Joomla machines. And we do it for all the frameworks out there. So we kind of, it's a lot of iteration and continuous improvement. Look at ways that we can, what we've learned, we can retrofit back to our old machines. It is the approach that we kind of take is more building stuff as a platform as a service. You tell us your end goals, and we'll build it up to that spec.
I run my own servers.
Yep.
How much is mod security, a highly configured version, and how much is config server firewall taking a hit on my performance?
Difficult question to answer without actually doing the analysis.
Sure, but I guess what I'm saying is config server firewall. It's obviously a script. Is that would that be hitting my server unduly, or is it acceptable?
It's without actually doing the analysis and looking at it.
What about mod security?
Mod security, I can't imagine there is going to be huge. We run on all our machines. So
Okay.
that's building Apache.
And do you have your own whitelist do you have your own list for mod security, or?
Yeah, with that stuff that's done per class.
Yeah.
So that's probably case by case.
Out of curiosity, with a lot of, especially when it comes to CMS hostings and that, a lot of the shared hosters that out there use mod PHP, which then enables you in a position where you've got to put 7.7 on
Don't do it in shared environments.
Sorry?
Don't do it in shared environments.
Etc. So I guess, and then I've also spoken with a lot of other hosting companies where I'm finding that even not in those environments, they tend to go for mod PHP. Do you guys have a preference over that in fast PHP, or is it, do you use it for this particular server? Do you look at, do you understand the build you use? Do you look at each thing?
Without wanting to say too much, cPanel does mod PHP, and I think that's why you see a lot of it out there.
Yeah.
Because it's just the way that stuff's done. We've never done it that way.
Sorry?
We've never done use mod
cool.
PHP in a shared environment. You do take a performance hit once you start using something external on the web server, but these days machines are so fast. It's such a non-event, and the security trade-offs by using mod PHPs, don't go down that path.
Yeah.
Not the shared environment we won't.
In relation to that, would that have anything to do with the enormous spike in hacking of Kieran?
It's unlikely. That's more, I would imagine that it's more the attack vector is more through the actual content itself, and it's actually given that way. It's, once again, that's something on a legal case basis to the analysis. I don't proclaim to be a security expert on Joomla, and I've never really pulled it apart that much.
Last one for me.
Yep.
I helped a client recover from a hack site, but in fact what it was a changed DNS record at the DNS level on a TCP server in somewhere. Would that have, do you reckon that could have been a DNS exploit, or do you think it would have just been a leaked password?
DNS exploits are pretty rare, despite you hear a bit of them. They're relatively rare. Like mine, since I've been working with Anchor, I've only seen one DNS quiz in an attack ever that's been successful. So I think that is pretty rare. That would actually be a DNS level exploit. I suspect what you get at there is probably just brute force password attack. Which is far more common than any other attacks.
I've actually, on a DNS level, I've actually seen a lot of, I've had to help dealing with American companies in particular, where they've actually let port 53 for open for incoming and outgoing, which is, and I've seen that's where I've seen the DNS exploits happen, is where they're actually leaving that open to enable that to occur.
Well, DNSSEC will fix that, right?
Yeah.
Eventually, whatever comes out.
I have a general hosting question.
Yep.
Nothing technical, but it's a really important question to me as somebody who owns a website. People have to buy into my website and agree to terms and conditions. My lawyers told me that there has to be an electronic record kept of them agreeing to the terms and conditions for that contract to be able to be held up in court. Now, should there ever be a legal case and a challenge, that is, and I, at the time, was hosting with you, and the developers checked with you, and you guys said, yes, that is the case. So one, can you tell me how it happens? Two, how does one access it, should there ever be a legal case? And three, how long do you have that available?
So for that kind of stuff, I'm assuming you're wanting log files when people log into
Well, if somebody buys into the web shop, they have to go and register, then they have to agree to terms and conditions, and then go through to pay.
Okay. So I
don't understand how it works.
I'm not a lawyer, so I've got to be careful.
No, this is not a legal question. This is a technical question as to how a hosting company handles the electronic record of it.
Okay, so all that data, that is recorded as to someone agreeing to terms and conditions, is actually something that will be stored in your application. So, like within Joomla or whatever piece of software you're using, you need to actually store that somewhere, either on the file system or in a database somewhere within your application to access it. As with respect to how we keep it or anything like that, I think it's 5 years.
But you guys don't have that, is what I'm trying to work out.
Well, it is on our service, yes. But we don't, for as long as your application deems it necessary to retain it.
So it's not like you do a 30-day backup, and so it's there for after that.
So hosting companies will always do backups, yes.
Yeah.
But the actual acceptance of those terms and conditions should be agreed, and that record should be stored within your application. And it's kind of outside our purview.
That's at a website level. What you're saying is at the website level, not at the hosting level.
So are you using Hiker Shop or are you using Virtumart? How are you processing your payment?
Through PayPal.
Through PayPal. How are you plugging into PayPal? You're plugging into PayPal directly?
Yes.
Right. PayPal will log that client's user ID and keep that against the record. If you're running Virtumart or Hiker Shop or any of these other carts that are out there, you keep a record of the log of all the purchases that are kept. It maps their IP address against that purchase, and then if you export that log, that's what you're needing to keep the records of.
No,
so
I'm
all those
actually-
sales you need to keep.
My lawyers are saying there needs to be a record kept of when they agree to the terms and conditions. You know, I agree.
Yeah.
So you've got to have a
That's
tick
what
box
your
and then you
website
map.
would do.
So that has to be kept through the website, through Joomla.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
However,
do you
which
guys,
one?
you must all be involved in doing that for your clients. Do you do that?
Well, I mean, it's kept as a record. When
When
someone goes and registers on the site, their user details are kept there. So what they did, if they agreed to X, Y, or Z,
Yeah.
or if they chose that I wanted a blue widget, then that blue widget would be stored.
Right.
As
So
you're
I need
saying,
to make sure somewhere in the back end of my website,
Yeah.
the people coding it.
Well, without
have
saying-
got some. Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I need to make sure that there is somewhere there
Mm.
that there's a record that
Yeah.
they said they ticked the box.
Correct.
record.
Yeah. But
And your
what our friend
site-wide
here is
terms and
saying is that
conditions cover that as well. So you've
Okay.
actually, so if you're doing that, your site-wide terms and conditions have to actually cover that as well. So you stipulate in your terms and conditions, and in that sense, you're covering what happens in PayPal. But it's a bit of a grey. What you're talking about is a bit of a grey kind of greyish area when it comes to legality.
Well, yeah, I'm just trying to.
It's the current what a lawyer says and what is technically
What
feasible.
happens in reality, and you've got
Yeah.
implied consent
Yeah.
and all other things that if they
Yeah.
use the service and they're kind of bound by the terms and
Well,
conditions.
the reality, I guess there's a subversive thing that if they tick the terms and conditions, or if they don't tick it, they don't get to go through the PayPal.
That's
Yeah,
pretty
okay,
much it.
good
Yes.
process.
So that's sort of thing
That's-
as well.
yeah.
That's a.
It's pretty,
Yeah.
pretty good safeguard, yeah.
But I guess back to my original question, you guys do have people with those records. That's
It's an application level.
yeah.
It's application level, so it's not like your application runs on a hosting server, but we don't dictate how your application behaves for all intents and purposes in that regard. So that's.
I guess what more your question would be is if you're hosting with, like for example, hosting with a company like Anchor, and then if something happened on a legal perspective and your lawyer or someone came back to you and said, we need that site restored as of date XYZ. So that's more that's more where your hosting company would go into it, where you'd have to contact your hosting company and say, look, do you have a backup, or what is your, and that, I mean, Kieran, does generally with hosting companies, backups and that are another
Depends on the
another
hosting
agreement
company.
that you have on top of your hosting?
Depends on the hosting company. Like most people who do shared hosting, they should be doing backups. I don't think anyone should be in the game. It's not doing it on shared hosting. Anything above and beyond that, it's really dictated by your terms and your agreement.
Yeah, but that, in other words, you wouldn't be able to do that because you only keep backups for 30 days.
Yeah, we keep backups for 30 days, but you need to keep in mind that if you're recording somewhere in your application that someone has ticked that box, then that's going to be backed up every 30 days anyway.
unless you went and deleted that record at the website level.
Yeah, but you know what, that's not going to stand up legally even if you do have that, because who knows, if you've got your terms and conditions in an article, how often have you edited that article and can you prove that? No, you can't.
Well,
So
the
you don't
lawyers-
even know what they've signed.
The lawyers are, they just said there needs to be an electronic record kept by the hosting company, is what they said.
Yeah, I think a lot of the law is very, very vague, and I know from our, we've been subpoenaed for information in the past, and it's very, very, like they're asking for digital records and stuff that they have no way of guaranteeing the authenticity of what's being provided anyway. So I think it's very, very vague.
It's very similar when you used to take a photo with old cameras and it printed the date and they said, oh look, that's a proof that it was taken on that date.
Yeah.
No, it's not. You could go and create it.
Thank you, anyway.
I've got several clients at the moment that are looking at rolling out Google Apps for mail program and that sort of stuff.
Yep.
I personally, I run it for my business and did it as a bit of a test, and I quite like how it works, but I'm finding it interesting in some ways in regards to backups. Like, at least when it was on my local server, everything was backed up. When it's as such in Google Apps and in the cloud, there's no way that I can restore anything. If it's deleted, that's it.
Yeah, I believe there are tools out there, and it's not something I've looked at in a huge amount. We have moved a lot of stuff like internally to the cloud for certain software as a service. One of our technical requirements during the selection process is that we can do backups that are independent of whatever mechanisms they've got, so we can actually get the data out either in a flat text file or some other mechanism, so we can manipulate it. We can maintain our own backup retention scheme. I think that's really something you need to assess on a case-by-case basis for yourself. and how important that really is. I do understand the concerns for the phone.
Combining those two discussions, what did we agree to when we used Google Apps in the terms and conditions? Probably that if it disappears, too bad, I presume.
I did read through the first page and a bit, but after a page and a half of good terms and conditions, I did get rather bored of reading it.
Yeah. I'm always really nervous of that if you're giving your data as well, because what's stopping them from tripling the price of the monthly fee next month or anything like that? I mean, there's market effects that are going to prevent it, but don't want to be bastards, I guess. At the end of the day.
Has anyone ever gone Google for loss of data?
Sorry.
No, I'm not saying I'm not saying in the room.
There's probably not many hosts in the world though that would do it as well as Google do. They've probably got a couple of servers, I'd suggest, and they've probably got a few redundancies. Just on that, I have set up a client once on, because I'm a massive fan of Google, that where you set up an IMAP secondary account that then constantly takes a backup of their Gmail account. It just sits there and
that's probably the best
get a cheap hosting account and just have it IMAPed and goes off there constantly. Hopefully you never look at it.
I think there's so much pressure on Google to provide the best service, because if they lose someone's email and they go to the email, Google's going to get smashed. But if a small business...
It's okay, they'll just find it. You won't be able to find it. You can search for that article and never appear again.
That's right. Yeah, they do have manual control. Yeah.
I've got just one more question about Anchor. Curious as to, with your cloud, how you're saying, you've been doing cloud hosting for, etc. Because what I find really interesting when I'm doing evaluations for clients is elasticity. Obviously, when clients talk cloud or when a CEO talks to me about cloud, that's what they're talking about. Yep. Now, I've found that a lot of hosting providers, for example, a lot of the going into the CMS-specific ones, where they say they have elastic hosting, but I still need to be able to predict if I'm going to have a marketing campaign and phone them and say, look, now that's great for a planned marketing campaign, but if I'm doing radio or whatever not, I don't know when that spike's going to happen. How do you guys handle that?
Well, the first question that I'll ask you is, have you ever actually needed to what scala respond to an event where your traffic is quadrupled or gone up by a stupid amount, and how successful?
Yes, Miranda when she had a baby.
How successful was that?
The blog fell over. Because it wasn't elastic. It wasn't elastic.
Oh, it wasn't elastic?
No.
And have you tried it with Autoscale and with the cloud computing and actually responded to an event of that nature?
Well, I've
never actually heard of anyone that's responded to that and had it work well in an Autoscale. Like, we need to triple, quadruple our capacity in the space of 10 minutes and have it happen. It just doesn't seem to be quite at that point yet.
I certainly did. I did that exactly when launch happened on a very large site. The host provider was the other one in Canberra that starts with J and OZHQ. And I specifically got theirs so that we could upscale. They were literally able to upscale me 4 CPUs and about 8 gig of RAM within the space of 30 minutes, and it was awesome.
30 minutes?
The thing they didn't tell me though, well, so they say, you can't downscale. So once you're up there at $500 a month, baby, you're on
that's a commercial decision. Sure. Fundamentally, that's a commercial decision of whatever they've decided to do. The second thing is Autoscale is the premise that you can actually respond to an increasing load in an automatic fashion, which is what the cloud pimps. So it can actually realise that you don't need to actually make the call. She'll actually detect that the traffic's coming and ramp up and do all this. And this is kind of like the marketing stuff around the cloud is. I've never seen that work. I've never seen Autoscale work. In terms of actually growing capacity very, very quickly, like in the example you've given, Amy, where you've actually got a fair amount of lead time to actually respond to that, then we can do that, and pretty much any hosted company where there's SOC can do that. And that's what virtualization is all around. Yeah, we're not calling it cloud, but at the end of the day, cloud's just virtualization and the ability to throw more resources and stuff quickly.
So how would you, for example, in that scenario, so something's happened and there's been a blog thing that's gone out because someone's had a baby or someone's tripped over in India or something like that, and overnight you didn't realise it, but your blog's just been hit and taken offline. Would you then handle that through redundancy or?
Well, with that one, the first thing is throw more resources at the problem.
Right. So you have your alerts would come out and you'd be on there and blah blah blah.
Yeah. So first thing, you can throw more hardware at the problem. It's generally the cheapest short-term hack that you can do to get resources quickly. Anything outside of that requires an amount of refactoring of the code. When you break it up into different front ends and back ends and all the rest of it, but it requires an amount of code change. The quickest way is just to throw more resources, which is exactly what Elastic Computing is for the most part. The difference being is you've already set up in the frame of mind that you can spin up more front ends, for example, on demand, and it'll add itself to the load balancer. For what it's worth, we can do that as well. We just don't call it cloud. We can spin up VMs, we can deploy code to it, we can add it to the load balancer, and we've done it in the past. Some of our big clients have had big campaigns. We've spun up front ends, we've actually told Puppet, spin up this machine with this resources on this piece of hardware, have it spin itself up, add itself to the load balancer, and be serving requests within 15 minutes. So doing this stuff isn't that difficult. Doing it the way that the cloud promotes itself, that it'll just happen, I think it's a bit of a load of BS. I've never said it just happened, but it's not particularly difficult to do.
I have to disagree. Essentially what you're saying is correct, but the cloud, what the cloud is about, or the cloud as I benefit, so if you're using OpenStack or whatever you're using, it's dealing with small spikes. It's not dealing with a site that's going up exponentially and you're trying to maintain it exponentially for months and months. What it's dealing with is those small spikes, and it's not spinning up a new instance of the server. All it's doing is sharing CPU usage or RAM from other adjacent servers or hardware.
Virtualization does that anyway.
Virtualization does that manually much better. It doesn't do it in the way that OpenStack or things like that are doing. Google itself is the world's biggest cloud. It is a cloud platform. If you're going to have a long-term increase in testing or in the environment, then obviously you spin up additional front-end services and do all that kind of stuff, which, yes, that's no different to what you do in a non-cloud scenario. To give you an example, and I used this a few years ago, when Joomla first came about, there was 2 times when Joomla.org went down. Once was when we announced the name, and the second time was when we announced the logo. And by down, it was dead and buried, and Robin had to restart the server multiple times. It would go up and it'd be down again 10 minutes later. I kind of knew sort of what the peak loads were that was doing that, and when I was actually, I've done a bit of investigating in the cloud, and I was running various scenarios also locally using just a lab type environment, but replicating the kind of loads that we're getting to see what would happen. And the suggestion was that it would generate that comes on a single server, dedicated server, and I was just running on 2 servers running in that cloud format. But it was sharing enough to deal with those little spikes, slash-dotting type scenarios, where it was actually coping with that better than a standard single server was able to do. Long term, if it was going to keep going up the way Joomla did, we'll end up with additional services in there. But that little thing, it definitely works.
Sure. Like what you're saying, I do agree in a lot of context. I think that what comes down to actually capacity planning and understanding how much headroom you've got on your equipment.
Yeah.
And from our point of view, we prefer to have a sizable amount of headroom to deal with the small incremental spikes. And I'm not entirely convinced that using cloud computing does that or removes that problem any better than just having sufficient headroom.
Well, even the cloud has had that room for that extra stuff. It's no different.
If I could just add, I think there's another element to it, and that's these things. Because the amount of times, that's what killed my site, my large site when I launched it, was the ad came on TV, and instantly people hit it because they're sitting there watching the TV, bang. And the amount of times I've been watching, and I do it almost for fun, watching, please don't judge me, watching those stupid 6 o'clock, 6:30 TV shows, and on comes the find my money thing. You hit the find my money thing on the website and the thing's down. So don't think that, like, in my opinion, it doesn't matter how much resources you throw at it. If you throw enough traffic at it in a one single, unless it's distributed, then it's going to fall over.
Yeah, I talked to them about that too. One of the crews of that do the 6 o'clock shows, and they said they've got to have a crashing service.
Oh, totally, absolutely.
They said we can't work it out. Like we put a story on about a site, and then we crash it, and we're like.
Well, it sounds like a really complex problem that I'd like to know more about and actually pull apart and fix. But I don't think that, and like, we've built systems that have got over 2 million users, and they're big systems. And it does happen. You're going to hit limits at some point in time, and kind of like improving infrastructure and trying to find bottlenecks. It's kind of very much like whack-a-mole. You find one bottleneck in your infrastructure, replace that, and then 5 minutes later it's something else. So you move from like running out of RAM to the disk subsystem, and then you run it, you fix that, then you hit CPU limits, and it's very much like whack-a-mole trying to find where your bottleneck is in your infrastructure.
That's all the fun.
Debatably, for some definition of fun, it gets a bit old after doing it for a few years.
Yeah.
To add to Norm's point about the 6 o'clock shows, we've got a client that does the same thing, a lot of promotions on 16 thing. Anyway, we used Cloudflare to distribute the DNS, which made an absolute awesome.
Cloudflare I've looked at and we've used in limited capacity. I think it's really good. My concern is it introduced a single point of failure that you have no control over whatsoever. What happens if Cloudflare goes down?
It does go down.
What happens then?
When I was going through mine, I used a CDN, Content Delivery Network, and a great one. And the challenge with CDNs at the moment, in my opinion, where we stand in Australia, is there's virtually no provider that has any nodes in Australia.
Oh,
Ryan do.
Who?
Ryan VM, but I should mention more.
That's fine. They've only got a point of presence in Sydney though. What's that difference in the same hosting in Sydney?
The bigger ones there's some smaller ones. There's like Ninefold, there's Mammoth, there's a couple of smaller.
Are they doing proper CDN or just object storage?
You know, I don't know. Yes, in particular, I don't know.
We've got over 100 points around the world, including Australia.
For data sovereignty. If you're wanting to carry that data sovereignty.
I know Coastline, as far as I'm aware, I believe they have, and really you want something on the East Coast, and my geography is really bad, so when I talk about East Coast, pretty much anywhere from Melbourne to Cairns. If you've got something somewhere in that segment, you should be fine for most of the East Coast. And if you've got somewhere in Perth, you should be pretty well right for most of the Australian region. So, and I'm pretty sure Coastline does. I think I've used it in the past.
Can I ask a really dumb question? Right, I've just looked up cloud computing on the wiki to make sure. It says it's the use of computing resources that are delivered as a service over a network. So what's the difference between cloud hosting and hosting?
Well, it's
got a lot more marketing.
One of the original terms of
I'm incredibly cynical because, like I say, I feel we've been doing cloud hosting for a long time. What really is, there's two things that I see, and this is so objective, also subjective, it depends on who you ask. Everyone's going to look at it. My take on cloud computing is it's a utility billing model, so you build stuff on an hourly basis.
Yep.
And you have a web interface where you spin up services yourself, so you don't need to actually interact with an individual.
Yep. And it's utility.
It's got APIs and ways to automatically. It's all about automation and being able to scale.
So in other words, it comes back to what you said right at the very start. You should be designing yourself out of a job, and this is their way of designing themselves out of a job.
No, well, it's supposed to be like electricity and water, right? You know how you pay with water and electricity and that you pay for what you use? One of the things of cloud computing, which come from grid computing, which has a very long history of, you know, where the thought thing's coming from, was very much so, you know, we're going to move into a time where the average person purchases electricity, the average person wants to purchase storage and etc., right? And that's what the cloud computing model was supposed to be in a sense.
From the outset, it looks cheaper as well, and that's probably the big marketing push because you're paying for everything by the hour, but multiply the hour.
I think it's good for testing. Just one last little thing on my scenario that I still love talking about is that every time the site went down, the ad agency that was handling it jumped up and down. Woohoo!
This is the KPI.
They were loving it.
Hang on, were they actually paying the web hosting company just to turn the website?
No, I had top running on my thing.
It's a partnership. Oh, thanks for your time.
I think we just